This is Force 13 live. Subtropical storm Alberto is down to 60 miles per hour according to the National Hurricane Center at their latest update, which just came out not so long ago. It's 11 o'clock on the US East Coast. It's 3 p.m. UTC, 4 p.m. here in the UK at Force 13 HQ. A tropical storm warning is now in effect is still in effect for Suwannee River to the Alabama-Florida border, and a storm surge watch for Suwannee River to Mexico Beach. There's the latest data on the left-hand side. Chance of storm conditions 99% in a few of those places now. 81 degrees at HQ, 81 degrees at Force 13 US HQ, and I'm joined by Craig. My name's Nathan Foy. This is Force 13 Live. Craig, first of all, your thoughts, and then continue that story you were telling us. If he's there. Has he left me hanging again? Oh well. I suppose it's just me. If you've got any comments or questions for us whilst we're live, do send a message to us on the YouTube page. We have the live chat going. You can send a message. Start your message with Force 13. It will light up big and bright for me, and I'll be able to read off your comment as long as it's sensible enough. And you can also, of course, follow Force 13 on its social platforms, Facebook and Twitter. Search Force 13 all in text. There's Subtropical Storm Alberto, which went east of its forecast track and isn't very far from land at all. You saw at that update there 36 miles southwest of where is it now? Port St. Joe, and that constitutes a movement in the last hour of around 15 miles northwest. Now, if it's moving northwest, then maybe it will stick closer to that earlier track. Question is, will it make landfall in Panama City? Will it make landfall further towards Destin or Fort Walton Beach? Can we hear Craig at all? Don't believe so. Oh. Little click anyway. Signs of life. Craig, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You completely missed my intro, I gather.
Sadly, yes. Why?
Well, I was just saying... I was just telling everyone the latest information. What are your observations? And you might want to finish that story you started before the break.
Ah, yes. Yes. Right. It was back in 2015 during Typhoon Malor. Typhoon Malor was approaching the Philippines, as we all know. The typhoon later made landfall. Two fishermen were caught in the typhoon, and they went out during the eye, and they reported a calm. They were then caught by the second eye wall, and sadly they were killed.
Yeah.
So this is a good example of pretty much why you do not go out during tropical storms or hurricanes, whatever, because there's always the backside of them, and sometimes they can be as violent as the first. Whereas with Alberto, it's going to be the eastern side, and that's about it.
I believe we're now joined by Devon.
Yes, can you guys hear me? I'm using a new mic.
Sounds interesting, although slightly a tad bit quiet.
Okay,
but we can hear you.
If I can turn that up.
It's just past 11 on the East Coast, and you're witnessing the first subtropical storm of the year, first named storm of the year, Devon.
Yep.
First time you've joined us so far, so what are your thoughts from beginning to current?
I've actually been following this storm pretty closely because my mom is actually down in Daytona Beach, Florida right now, and she's been very concerned about the storm. So I've at least had to keep a close eye on it. As far as it seems like a pretty normal early season storm in the Gulf of Mexico. It's got a subtropical designation because none of the convection is really tightly clustered around the center, and it really hasn't been for most of its time. Remember when it formed, the center was just completely naked and the convection was all around. From what I saw, the winds are now down to 60 miles an hour. And maximum expected rainfall in the landfall vicinity, I think, is around 8 to 10 inches in Alabama or something like that.
Could well be.
Correctly.
That's on the forecast. Hasn't happened yet, but it could well end up being.
Okay. So just making sure I've got all the
I think
right
so
data
far
here.
it's something like 3 in isolated locations, 3 inches so far.
Yeah, and this storm has not really gone anywhere too quickly anyways in the past little bit, so...
And don't we just hate when that happens?
Yeah,
Right,
it's not. Yeah, it's just... Start moving fast and get it over with. That is one thing that is odd with this storm, is that usually the storms that stall are typically more in the western Gulf of Mexico, at least early on in the season. It's usually a western Gulf of Mexico thing. Usually the storms in the eastern Gulf of Mexico early on in the season, they are very quick moving storms. If you remember Colin or I think it was Andrea back in 2013, very quick moving storms. Even Debbie, even though that putted around in the Gulf of Mexico for a little bit in 2012, that eventually took off past Florida. And this one, it has definitely slowed down a little bit. And
models did call for it, though.
Yeah, the models did call for it, so it's definitely not an unexpected slowdown. I know that way before, the models called for something a lot worse than just a slowdown, which thank God that hasn't happened, or doesn't seem to be happening. Other than that, it seems like the landfall should be happening soon-ish, few hours.
Is it definitely on its way out now, or is there a chance of any strengthening?
I don't know. Well, the last time I called for a storm to be out, it turned into a Cat 4. So I'm not going to make any judgments about a storm.
Which one was that?
Harvey.
Oh gosh.
So I'm not going to make any judgments about the storm strength. Reason would tell me that it's on its way out, but let's just say that it's going to be 60 miles an hour all the way to landfall.
That's fair. That could well happen.
Just looking at radar, Nathan, now. The highest DBZ rating has come in of 50 DBZ, or close to the centers. Note centers.
Oh yes, Devon, we were talking about this. Multiple vortices possibly forming.
Yeah, that's something that usually happens with these messy early season systems in the Gulf of Mexico. I wouldn't be surprised if something like this is happening, where you have multiple little eddies going around in the center around a larger, broader circulation that still has just one center of low pressure.
Is it a detriment to a storm's intensity?
Yeah, that's typically not good for a storm's intensity. It at least isn't productive for strengthening, typically. Yes. It at least isn't productive for strengthening.
Well, we saw that with Cindy and what effect that had. So.
Any chance of tropical storm?
At this point, I think it had its best chance at being tropical yesterday, because it had a pretty good cloud outburst near the center of the storm, and I figured that they were going to designate it tropical, and never got designated, and clearly the convection has not lasted. So
Good call then.
I don't see it being designated as a tropical system. This is a very broad circulation. If you take a look at it on satellite, the actual circulation is
Getting
pretty broad,
broader.
and there's not a ton of convection to be said around the center of the storm. In fact, probably the biggest burst of convection is over Cuba right now.
Yes.
So,
And the second biggest is probably near South Carolina, where there's a flash flood warning.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a very broad circulation. I wouldn't expect it to be designated tropical. That's at least what I would say.
Craig, any input? What are Recon up to?
Apart from flying around, I'll just quickly see what they're doing. What are they? Yeah, so they're doing, right, okay, they're doing exactly as I said last hour. They're doing an investigation of the south side. They haven't found much.
Yeah, I didn't think they would. It's almost a sunny, clear day. There's the south of the storm.
Just to reiterate, I don't know whether you're following the Recon, Devin.
Looking at it.
The strongest side, as you're seeing, is eastern side. The northern side is non-existent, pretty much. The eastern, oh god.
Yeah, the eastern side, and that's typical because, of course, the right front quadrant's always gonna usually produces the strongest amount of winds. That's where all of the momentum from the circulation and the storm's forward velocity is. So it would be reasonable to expect that the right side of the system, especially for a low that is subtropical as this one, to be having the main bulk of the 50-knot winds that are going on in the storm. And from what I see, yeah, that continuing to happen. The right front quadrant, which would be the northeast side of the storm, seems to be having the strongest of the winds. And if I'm taking a look at this Recon diagram right, those winds should be either near the shore or on shore right now.
Yeah, I'm not really holding up much for the southern side, let's put it that way.
Well, there is a nice little convective band that stretches from the southeastern tip of Louisiana going all the way into the Great Bend region of Florida, but that's an arc that's about 200 miles south of the center.
Yeah, they've not really gone that far out in terms of investigation. They've only gone, say, as far. Oof.
And I don't think that they're going to go that far south.
No, I sincerely doubt they won't.
I mean, the storm's basically hugging the coastline at this point, so it's just about the storm just tiptoeing its way onto the land. And
I mean,
of course the planes aren't gonna. And as soon as the storm makes landfall, they're gonna continue going back and forth, monitoring the south side, and then they really do those planes for center investigation usually. So,
are you able to see the stream at the moment, Devon? And 1 minute visible imagery visible on the stream, and you can.
I see that. Yep.
What do you think?
Well, as Craig has pointed out, you can definitely see the eddies that are being formed in the center of the storm, but there is still a very clear, broad circulation with one low pressure center. So
that is still clear at the moment, yes.
So that is basically what's going on there. It's still a well-defined center of circulation. This isn't like Colin, which had the center of circulation being spread out over 250 miles.
It's almost a naked Isabel.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh no.
I missed what just happened then because I just lost my audio for a few seconds. But yeah, there's still that convection to the north there, which on radar isn't as impressive as it looks there. It's probably not particularly high level clouds due to
They're
wind
coming
shear.
up. Yeah, they're not coming up very high level clouds, at least on the infrared imagery that I'm able to find, which is not much since the
Let's not get
floaters
started
are
on all
down.
that.
Yeah, I'm not. No comment there. But let me get the BD imagery up since I actually know how to read that.
I was just looking at just looking at the radar, and it's as if even the center is becoming rain filled. So that's gonna be.
Yeah, that's no good for strengthening.
So that's pretty much. It's almost
That's
a foregone conclusion near enough that now that Alberto is going to come up to landfall, with the center becoming, well, starting to pick up rain and starting to become rain filled.
Yeah.
It's almost a foregone conclusion that, well, Alberto is pretty much done strengthening.
Which is, of course, a great thing. We don't.
Oh,
we
yeah.
don't want these storms. We don't want this storm, strengthening anymore. Even though this is a rather weak system, it's still something to be taken seriously. Of course, like I said
Flooding.
earlier, the 6 to 10 inches of rainfall that's still expected in the landfall area and further inland into Alabama, southeastern Alabama, expecting 6 to 10 inches. So clearly, flooding is still a significant concern with this system. So just because the storm is weakening here, it's still something that you should pay close attention to the storm, and of course follow any instructions from your local National Weather Service if any flood advisories or flash flood warnings or anything like that
Which there is
were
one.
to come out.
There is a flash flood warning for the Myrtle Beach area.
Oh, that's in South Carolina. That's
Yes.
yes. Yeah.
It's sort of related to the storm, but that has been in effect for a little while. And if you look at the radar, which I'm sure you can somewhere, it's looking pretty severe. 2 to 3 inches of rain has already fallen in that area, and more is expected.
And that's, again, to be expected with the storm that has such a broad circulation as this. It's affecting, it's got that convective band all the way down in Cuba. It's affecting rain over in South Carolina. So, yeah, that's to be expected with a subtropical storm such as this. They tend to be very broad systems.
Craig, talk to us about this.
Well, the SPC Storm Prediction Center, Day 1 Outlook, or obviously today, has issued a marginal risk for parts of the Florida Panhandle. Obviously, this is going to be associated with Alberto, and obviously an enhanced risk for pretty much the same areas that we saw some pretty large and pretty significant tornadoes last night. But that remains to be seen whether this will occur. Probably will. Normally with enhanced risk, they can probably produce some rather spectacular outbreaks. But the marginal risk across the parts of Georgia, South Carolina, and most of the Florida Panhandle, the risk of tornadoes down there is only a 2% risk, but less to say that that's still a chance of tornadoes, so you can expect the odd one. But the reason why that risk is so low is obviously, as described earlier, is mainly because of the dry air is affecting the moisture getting into the storm itself. It can't get the moisture to spawn the thunderstorms that will eventually, well, that could lead to tornadic, pronounce it correctly, tornadic development or any tornadic storms. So this is pretty much what we're looking at now, is that you're looking at a very dry, pretty much almost a desert-like storm, hardly any moisture in it.
Oh, so you're saying that Mekunu and Alberto have swapped places?
Oh.
Maybe.
Not exactly.
The only difference is that Mekunu actually, that actually made landfall as a very significant storm over there, and is probably going to cost.
No, that's been
Yemen several $100 million worth of damage.
It's been a terrible disaster. I don't know what the figures are. There were at least 7 killed from the storm, and 8 injured. That's probably higher now.
Yeah, that's no good. The storms making landfall with that intensity on the Arabian Peninsula, that's just rare. Just hurricane landfalls, is because you got all the dry air there, that's going to affect the system, obviously, but clearly Mikunu didn't really care much about the dry air from the Arabian Peninsula, so yeah, I can see how that is a pretty bad disaster over there.
Does Alberto tell us anything about the upcoming season? Anyone who'd like to answer?
No, I don't think this really... Go ahead, Craig.
I wouldn't really say it would mean anything. I mean, we've seen that with Anna. We would there was people expecting an active season.
Yeah.
We didn't really get that.
We do get those questions in the comments time and again.
So, to be honest, I would mainly wait and see what this season brings, because just going up, trying to base an entire season off of one storm, that's like trying to predict the lottery numbers. That's near impossible.
Yeah, this doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have an active season. It doesn't necessarily follow that it's going to be an inactive season. It's just one of those early season spin-ups in the Gulf of Mexico. These things, they do happen. This year it happened a little bit earlier than normal, yeah, but it still follows the same pattern of most early to mid-June tropical storms. Or subtropical storms end up forming in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's a generally weak system with not too much convection around the center, with most of the convection around the outside of it, and the main threat from landfall being very heavy rainfall. And this, your typical run-of-the-mill early season storm. Now, if this actually developed into a hurricane, then yeah, I think that might tell us something about how warm the waters in the Gulf of Mexico are and how favorable the environment might be. But this doesn't really give any insightful information.
Devon, do you put... Some models were saying that Alberto would become tropical, and do you put the fact that it didn't do that down to wind shear and dry air?
There's a lot of factors that go into whether the storm becomes tropical or not. I would probably say that the biggest contributor is wind shear. If you've got the wind shear, you can't get the thunderstorm development around the center. Wind shear is always going to be a big concern. In subtropical systems, they can survive in higher wind shear environments than your typical tropical storm. And this is a higher than typical shear environment that the storm is in, and that will kill any hope of the storm developing really good deep convection near the center, which is a good thing for Florida and Alabama, of course, but a bad thing for storm development. So yeah, wind shear definitely just caught up this storm, chopped it up.
I've just received a comment in private that has been... I think the sentiment has been repeated by 1 or 2 people in the comments. Ready for this? That PTC-10 looked better.
Oh.
Okay. I don't recall PTC-10, so I will reserve comment.
Well, let's put it this way. PTC-10 was more like an unnamed version of Colin. Let's just leave it at that.
Ah.
Oh. Well,
it wasn't really a Colin. It was off Georgia, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's what I was just saying. It was an unnamed version of Colin.
Not
exactly, not in the same place, but it was just an unnamed version. but I know that that was supposedly showing signs of possible development, but never did. Mainly because wind shear, dry air, and Hurricane Harvey had something to do with
Yeah.
that.
I don't
Well, let's
know.
just leave that at
PT.
that.
I'm looking at some images of PTC-10 now, and that looks very, very disorganized compared to what we've got here.
I think so.
PTC-10 was disorganized. It was.
Yeah, this looks a lot more disorganized. What we have here, is we've got a very clear, well-defined center of circulation here. You can see the eddies, but you can definitely see the broad circulation.
But it
Meanwhile,
makes
with,
me wonder,
PTC-10,
Devon.
yeah.
It makes me wonder where this thing is actually going. If you look at the whole broad circulation, it looks to me as though it's a very slow north movement. But if you look at it some other ways, you could say it's northwest.
I was just gonna say that looking at radar, it's looking like trying to track northwest.
Yeah, and when you got circulation as broad as this one, you know, or any kind of circulation like this, it's gonna wobble. It's gonna wobble. Sometimes it'll be moving north, sometimes it'll be moving northwest. And what you have to really consider is the average movement over a large time span. So over an hour, it might look like it's moving north, or the next hour might look like it's moving northwest. But the whole trend is that it's moving northwest. So,
I'm just looking at those eastern rain bands, Devin, on northwestern quadrant. Those rain bands have just completely started to fade away. They are nowhere near as good as what they were.
But it looks like one's developing just on land.
Yeah, I'm catching sight of that as well, just north of Port St. Joe.
And that would be where the strongest winds are located.
Yes. But here's another thing I've not noticed from any of the mesonets or the weather stems that have reported most of these wind gusts or sustained winds. They haven't really been saying much.
In terms of wind speed.
Yeah, in terms of wind speeds or damage, because there was only one damage report of power lines being down, and I think Highway 86 had to be shut down because of that. Well, obviously it would be, because you don't want folk trying to drive over live power lines.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even want to get back to the derecho that came through here not too long ago and knocked down all sorts of power lines. F1 tornado literally came within a half-mile of my house. That was not a fun day.
Now, Devon, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, is the inventor of the CDPS scale, and I wonder if you'd like to talk to us about how it fares on there.
Okay. Well, I've put some more research into the CDPS, and I'm working on a refinement to it that instead of counting forward speed as a variable, I'm counting maximum rainfall as a variable, as I find that has a stronger correlation to actual damage caused than the forward speed. Forward speed actually,
yes.
I don't even know why I used that in the first place. The correlation is actually not there at all.
Fair.
So with this upgrade, and with the prediction, let's say, of a maximum of 10 inches of rain in Alabama, which might be a bit high for this storm, but, you know, worst case scenario is usually the best way to go, because
I think the NHC are on about
prepare
6.
for the worst.
I think the NHC said 6.
I saw 6 to 10.
6 to 10, okay.
So I'll say 10, just to be on the safe side. Plus, this is a slow-moving storm. Who knows? It might stall for an hour over land, and that'll add another 2 inches.
Yep.
You know, so that could happen. And as of right now, on the newly updated CDPS scale, that puts the storm at 13 points, which is a stage 2. And what this means is that I've now revised the stages now that you can rank storms in certain percentiles. And this storm is now ranked roughly having the same damage potential as the 20th percentile. So that means that 80% of all landfalling systems in the Atlantic have had a more destructive potential than this storm. So if that gives you an idea, that should give you an idea of roughly what we're dealing with here.
Have you got any recent storm examples that are the same?
No, actually, I have not gotten around to generating that list. I will get that list generated as soon as I can. I'll get that list generated as soon as I can, but I didn't necessarily go with that because, like I said, I've got the percentile list now, so you can say, okay, this ranks about 20% on the list, so 80% of all landfalling storms have a more destructive potential than this one. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just moving on here. Just a note, the flood watches in Florida have been, southern Florida that is, have been discontinued except one just north of Lake Okeechobee.
Okay.
That's all.
Yep. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say too. I'm still seeing the accuracy of the damage estimates, so I'm not going to say them on the live stream, but this is roughly in the 20th percentile of all landfalling storms.
Alright then. We're going to stay here for until the end of this hour, and then we're going to go off the air, and then we may come back later on depending on what Alberto's doing, or there might be some recorded updates. So for the next half hour, if you want to send any questions in that you've got, this will be your final opportunity for a little while. But the latest on Alberto is this: it's got winds of 60 miles an hour. It is about 50 miles from Panama City, and it's, according to the National Hurricane Center, moving north at 8 miles an hour, which is interesting. 992 millibars. Storm surge watch for the Suwannee River to Mexico Beach. Tropical storm warning for Suwannee River to the Alabama-Florida border. Just to reiterate those rain expectations according to the NHC, central Cuba could still see an additional 5 to 10 inches. Isolated storm totals could reach 25. The Florida Panhandle and across eastern and central Alabama and western Georgia, 4 to 8 inches, isolated 12 now, Devon.
Okay.
Up to 12. The Florida,
up to 12.
Florida Keys and Florida Peninsula, additional 1 to 3 inches, isolated 10. The rest of the southeast and Tennessee Valley into the lower mid-Atlantic from Tennessee east through the Carolinas, 2 to 6 inches. Rains in Cuba could produce life-threatening flash floods and mudslides. Flooding and flash flooding are possible in the southeast United States, including Florida. Storm surge, if it occurs at high tide, and I have no idea whether it will or not, Suwannee River to Mexico Beach to expect 2 to 4 feet of storm surge. And the potential for tornadoes as well. We've had 1 tornado warning today, and Craig suggests that there might have been a water spout earlier. Craig, anything new on that front?
No.
Oh, that was pretty brief. Nothing at all?
Absolutely nothing.
What about the latest band? Still developing as it's moving through? Panama City might get another dose.
It has drastically expanded. I'm gonna give it that much. But anything outside of Alberto, I mean, there's one severe thunderstorm warning, but that's in Kansas, so that's quite a ways away from
nothing
Alberto.
to do with Alberto, that's for sure.
Yes, there's quite a ways away. There's a few other flash flood warnings in Nebraska, Kansas. Yeah, those are also quite a ways away from Alberto, apart from the one that's in North Carolina.
Wind probabilities are as follows. Tallahassee now down to 9%. St. Mark's 6%. Apalachicola 100% pretty much, 99 they say. Panama City 99, Destin 78, that went down from 99 believe it or not. Columbus, Georgia 10%, Birmingham, Alabama 9, Montgomery 27, Pensacola 10. They don't list any others, so New Orleans, Gulfport, Jacksonville all out of the percentage running now.
Which means less than, what, 2% or something like that?
Not actually sure.
Is it? I know there's a percentage cut off. Can't remember if it's less
I've
than
seen
2%
3
or
before
less than
anyway.
5. Okay.
Mobile out of the area too.
So we're pretty much getting a general consensus of where the storm is very likely to impact.
Well, I should certainly hope so, given it's only 50 miles off.
Well, everyone would like to hope so.
Yes.
I think we'd be a bit concerned if they hadn't a clue.
No, that would be a problem, yes.
In fact, concerned would be a bit of an understatement.
Are you concerned for any of those thunderstorms further east, moving onshore over the Bend area, entering Georgia? Any future to become severe thunderstorms?
Well, that's what I was saying. If anywhere to the north, east, and potentially west of Alberto, you do have chances of tornadoes and severe thunderstorms. Mainly because the spiral bands will stretch further when the storm does die and expand when it goes extratropical. Therefore, the risk of tornadoes will there probably increase, but not by much. Best bet would probably be going back to Harvey. I'm not going to really say any of this will happen, but you know, can expect it. When Harvey made landfall and was deep inland, I think over near pretty much the central U.S. In Alabama, you just seen this little, pretty nice looking supercell that it spawned on its outer band, and then obviously later spawned a very large tornado. So even large tornadoes, expect some of them, because those are possible. Because I wasn't really expecting any large tornadoes out of Harvey, but he spawned an EF4, which is very rare, especially out of tropical cyclones. Tropical cyclone related major tornadoes are very rare, because their average strength's around EF0 to EF2 if it's even lucky. But I would mainly expect, if you're anywhere in those states, say from obviously the Florida Panhandle and Florida in general, Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina to North Carolina, even in later dates, expect some severe weather of some description, because the Storm Prediction Center is flagging Alberto as a marginal for tomorrow. So it's going to remain to see what Alberto does, because a marginal can easily go up to a slight risk, maybe to enhance later that day that it goes up. So it's going to be interesting to see what it does tomorrow, especially at peak heating for today, towards the evening hours, to see what severe weather unfolds.
Alright then, well we're here for 20 more minutes before we finish up for a little while. Any more news out of Recon?
They've gone very quiet, but I'm just going to update them now because I've been updating them constantly. Okay, they've done the entire sweep of the south side and it's non-existent.
What's non-existent? Sorry, I wasn't listening.
Oh god. The south side is pretty much the same state as the north. Winds are barely, I would say, 30-40 knots. So this is going towards the eastern side. So now they're in the eastern side again. They're heading northwest in the eastern side. So they are recording 40-45 knots.
So we'll hear them going into the most active side before we finish up?
They should do, and we'll probably get another pressure reading.
That'll be interesting as well. Pressure has gone up slightly. It was 990 early this morning. Now, well, they said 992 at the advisory, but you've only seen 993, haven't you, Craig?
Yeah, I've seen 2 drops where they've said 993.
So weakening. It would appear.
back-to-back 993 drops.
So to be brutally honest, though, it's not really a matter of big deal about the air pressure, whether it's 993 and the NHC goes say 992, which they did.
Sure.
It's not really much of a difference unless they go Recon find say 980 millibars or something.
Yeah.
And the NHC goes anything higher.
I don't know if this storm is really showing anything that would suggest significant weakening on that scale, though. But for circulation as broad as this one, 993 is actually a pretty high pressure for the storm. You got to consider again the broader, because of the way that isobars work with winds being created by pressure gradients. So the tighter the isobars, obviously the higher the wind. If the storm is a very broad system, such as this one, you need to have more concentric isobars in order to produce the same amount of winds than compared to, let's say, a very small system like Hurricane Danny or something. Yes. So for a broad system such as this, you actually need more lower pressure to achieve the same amount of wind speeds, and that's pretty much exactly what we're seeing here.
Okay, well, that's the latest, and at present there is no more information. Don't forget that flash flood warning, which is in effect for the Myrtle Beach area. And of course the tropical storm warnings and flood watches extending all the way up into Tennessee, and there is hydrological outlooks also, I think, in Kentucky into Indiana.
Just another update from the Recon there now.
And Illinois.
Pretty much. They're encroaching on the center again, so, and wind speeds on the southeastern side, or east-southeast, I should say, are about the same strength as they were in the same, pretty much the same sectors they were already recorded. So around 45 knots to around 34, 40 knots. But they're getting closer to the center, and those winds, they're not even there yet, and the winds are around 34 to 40 knots. Which must mean
they're getting there.
Oh yeah, they're getting there, but which must mean there's a hell of a lot of lulls over this thing. Which then again, it's subtropical, so we can expect that.
It's gonna be a broad. Again, it's a broad low circulation, and it has the couple of eddies in it, but still has the one center of pressure, and they're going in to measure that. So they'll probably be. I don't think that we're actually going to see the drop within this live stream. It should be maybe 10-20 minutes after this live stream.
Yeah.
But I would not expect the hurricane hunters to find much different.
I would merely expect either, say, more of a 1 millibar rise, which has been pretty much average here. It's not been anything comparative of rapid weakening. It's more or less been just gradual.
Yeah, if there's even any weakening that has happened, which at least from the satellite perspective, any convection that's gone down has been replaced by new convection on the north side. So I wouldn't necessarily expect the storm's pressure to have really gone anywhere. If it's gone anywhere a millibar,
Yeah. To be honest, I would just expect gradual weakening, even if it is that, or just consolidation just stays where it's at for right up to landfall. That would probably be the best bet of what to expect, really. Just either it weakening a little bit more in terms of air pressure, maybe a little bit by wind speed, but best bet and more the higher odds would be it just sustaining its current intensity of 60 miles per hour and just going up to landfall with that.
Yeah. That's about what I would expect with this storm. I don't really see the strength really going anywhere with this. It's just gonna stay where it's at all the way until it makes landfall, which then of course rapid weakening will be happening. But I would like to reiterate once again that the winds are by far the least worrisome thing about this storm. 6 to 10 inches of rain expected in southeastern Alabama, locally up to 12 inches. So obviously flooding is going to be a rather large concern with this storm. If there are any flood advisories or flash flood warnings, just follow the instructions from your local officials. If you're told to get out of your home because of flooding, get out of your home, because they definitely know what they're talking about. And they think that if your house is going to flood, it probably will. So just make sure to heed any advice from local officials and just stay safe during this storm. It's going to definitely be a little bit of a wet one.
Yes. What do you think about... Because previously we were looking at the storm, and at times the eastern side was the wet side and then the western side, and how far do you think significant rainfall will extend westward here?
That's really difficult to tell.
That's why I'm asking the hard questions.
Yeah. Well, that would require me actually looking at radar.
Well, the rain's just about reaching Fort Walton Beach right now. Probably arrive in Pensacola pretty soon as well.
I am definitely not up to date on my Florida Panhandle
very close
here, so.
to the Alabama border.
Okay, pretty close to the Alabama border. Okay. Well, that would be basically to the extent of where the convection is showing up on the infrared imagery, and my browser's frozen.
Damn it.
Yeah, this is what happens when I try to do live streams on this computer. It really freezes it up bad.
If we just look at the convection alone on the imagery, you know, it's getting interesting. The center is becoming clearer. It is like you've taken 10 layers off a hurricane.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty cool, and that's usually what these subtropical storms look like, is that they've got the convection around the outside and you're able to see right into the center of the storm, and this system's no different. So well, I think that's honestly one of the cool things about subtropical systems, is that what you just described is typically true.
Well, from my point of view here, it does look like convection is building all around the storm. Don't you think? Slowly.
From what I'm able to see, at least from the slider imagery, there is convection building to the north, but at the same time, at least from what I'm able to see, it seems to be sort of weakening on the very western edge. So, like I said, what's going in is coming out. At least from what I'm able to see.
I'm just wondering if it's doing a last-ditch effort to become tropical that will fail.
It's not. I don't see this becoming trouble.
No, I would strongly agree that this thing isn't really going to become tropical at all.
I don't see this thing becoming tropical. It's not gonna.
Anyway,
No.
Craig, there's a comment directed to you in the comments. He's looking for a medal.
You're not
What
getting
kind of-
one.
What kind of metal?
Craig must have said
I mean,
something at some
there's-
point. So that person deserves a medal or whatever he usually says.
I do not recall.
I see that Panama City right now is getting hit by
It
a
is.
pretty intense wall line.
That's the one we were looking at forming half an hour ago, and it's now reached Panama City.
Yeah. So
That would be one of
yeah,
the worst
they're
bands.
that's probably containing some of the strongest winds of the storm right there.
Yeah,
That-
probably winds of around
Some of the
50,
strongest wind.
around 50 to 60 miles an hour.
Yeah, that would be about right. That looks like it's containing some of the strongest winds.
And probably
Um,
gusts of around, say what would, probably gusts of around 60, 65, 70 at a push.
Maybe that might be pushing it. 65 to 70 is probably the highest gusts in there.
Well, we're pretty much finishing here. Do you guys have
Yeah.
any final comments?
I'm waiting for the latest Recon image to come. It should be coming in any second now.
Alright, we'll be able to wait for that, I'm sure. Craig, any summaries or anything you would like to bring to people's attention?
Well, there's not much else to add, really. I think
Will
we've-
Force 13 US be going live?
Maybe later if this outbreak in the western US, to maybe even including Alberto. But if anything severe pops up, it'll be either covering both Alberto and the western US outbreak that could occur later today. But obviously, I'll have to discuss with everyone of the US members if they're going to do that or if they were going to do another live stream or not.
As far as the Recon is concerned, they have just started getting into the center. They really haven't found. The winds have not necessarily gone up. The highest surface winds I'm seeing are in between 30 and 40 knots. And the
Ooh.
pressure seems to be getting down to 994, but that's still decreasing at the time that I have this data. So probably reasonable to expect another 993 drop out of the storm. Of course, they penetrated from the southeastern side, so that's not the side that's containing the strongest winds. The strongest winds are probably either close to being onshore or are onshore right now. So I highly doubt that they're going to be able to get the strongest winds from the plane.
I think looking at the previous Recon data from the winds, I think those winds will be onshore now.
That's what I'm saying. Like if they aren't onshore now, they're just off. Panama City should be getting hit with some of the worst of the storm now.
Yeah.
Winds, as far as winds wise.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with Port St. Joe. Port St. Joe's is probably getting them and probably still getting some of them. They should be probably just about to move. I'm just basing this off of the Recon data that they should just be moving out of some of the stronger winds and maybe into a little bit weaker.
Yeah. But yeah, the 1150 Recon update is in, and it doesn't look like that we're gonna have any new or different data.
Yeah, that seems fair, and visually it doesn't seem to have changed very much either. I think this is going to be a pretty straightforward, although not easy, landfall.
Yeah.
and I'm just continuing to look at the